Preface. Horror has always been a fascination of mine, and it's a joy to share that with my son. This collection of stories is a testament to our mutual love of the genre. So turn off the lights, grab a blanket, and prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown. Chapter 1. The detective arrives. Detective Jameson and his assistant Sylvia had been assigned to investigate a recent kidnapping of a wealthy family in a remote cabin in the woods. They arrived at the scene just as the sun was setting. The cabin was nestled in the thick forest, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and wet soil. As they approached the cabin, Jameson noticed a small piece of paper fluttering in the breeze. It was a note left by the kidnapper, who called himself the chef, demanding a ransom for the family's safe return. Jameson's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. Lives were at stake, and time was of the essence. Without wasting any time, Jameson and Sylvia entered the cabin, searching for any clues that might lead them to the chef's hideout. They quickly found signs of struggle, overturned furniture and broken windows, indicating that the kidnapper had not gone quietly. As they made their way through the dark cabin, Jameson's instincts kicked in. He scanned the room for any evidence, analyzing every inch of the cabin for any sign of the chef's whereabouts. Sylvia followed closely behind, scanning the area for any additional clues. Suddenly, Jameson's attention was drawn to the fireplace. There was a strange odor emanating from it, a smell he couldn't quite place. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing as he tried to determine what it was. Suddenly he realized what it was, and he recoiled in horror. The smell was that of burning flesh. Jameson's heart rate spiked as he realized that the kidnapper had already made his move. He knew he had to work fast or the family would be lost forever. He and Sylvia continued their search, their pace quickening with each passing moment. Every second felt like an eternity as they combed the cabin, their senses heightened and their nerves on edge. As they searched, Jameson found something that made his blood run cold. It was a scrap of paper torn from a notebook with a message scrawled on it in bold red letters. Bon appetit. The words sent chills down Jameson's spine, confirming his fears that the chef was not to be taken lightly. He knew that this case was going to be one of the toughest he had ever faced, and that it would take all of his skills and cunning to bring the chef to justice. With renewed determination, Jameson and Sylvia continued their search. They would not rest until they had found the family and brought the chef to justice. The stakes were high, but Jameson knew that failure was not an option. The clock was ticking, and time was running out. Chapter 2. The Kitchen. Jameson noticed something odd about the surroundings. The woods were too quiet, as if nature itself knew of the impending danger. They silently crept towards the kitchen, guns at the ready, and took a deep breath. As they entered the kitchen, they were met with a sight that made their stomachs turn. The table was covered with raw meat, some of it clearly human. The chef was nowhere in sight, but they knew he couldn't be far. Suddenly they heard a noise behind them, and before they could react, the chef had struck Jameson over the head with a frying pan, rendering him unconscious. Sylvia, who had been standing behind him, was quickly overpowered and tied up next to him. When Jameson came to, he was tied to a chair in the chef's kitchen, and the smell of roasting meat filled the air. The chef, wearing a twisted mask, loomed over him, brandishing a knife. "Welcome to my kitchen, Detective Jameson. I've been waiting for you," he said, a hint of malice in his voice. Sylvia was also bound beside him, her face twisted in pain. The chef grinned at them both. "You should feel honored, my guests. You're about to become a part of my masterpiece." Jameson struggled against his bonds, but they were too tight. "You won't get away with this," he growled. The chef laughed. "Oh, I already have. You're too late, detective. You and your partner are going to make the perfect main course." Sylvia whispered urgently to Jameson, "We have to get out of here. We can't let him win." Jameson nodded, his mind racing. They had to find a way out of this, or they would end up on the chef's dinner table. He looked around the kitchen, searching for any sign of a weakness in the chef's defenses. The chef noticed their whispers and stepped closer to them, the knife glinting in the dim light. "What's the matter, detective? Don't like the menu?" You'll change your mind soon enough. Jameson knew they had to act fast. He scanned the room for anything he could use to break free. As he looked around, he noticed a pot of boiling water on the stove. It was their only chance. He whispered to Sylvia, "When I nod my head, knock over the pot of boiling water. We'll use the distraction to break free." Sylvia nodded, her eyes wide with fear. They waited for the right moment, and when it came, Jameson nodded his head. Sylvia kicked over the pot, and the boiling water splashed onto the chef's mask. He screamed in pain, dropping the knife, and Jameson and Sylvia quickly broke free of their bonds. They tackled the chef to the ground, overpowering him. As they handcuffed him, Jameson breathed a sigh of relief. They had stopped the chef from carrying out his twisted plan. But at what cost? Sylvia could feel her heart racing as she watched the chef move closer with the knife. She knew they had to act fast if they wanted to survive this. She looked over at Jameson, who was trying to free himself from the ropes. The chef leaned in closer to Sylvia, his breath hot on her face. "You look like a prime cut of meat," he said with a twisted smile. "I can't wait to taste you." Sylvia's stomach turned at his words, and she felt bile rise in her throat. She knew she had to do something, anything, to stop him. Suddenly, she remembered the gun that was tucked into the back of her pants. She had managed to hide it from the chef when he had tied her up. She glanced over at Jameson, who had finally managed to loosen the ropes around his wrists. With a quick movement, Sylvia pulled the gun out and aimed it at the chef. "Stay back!" she shouted. The chef's eyes widened in surprise, but then he started to laugh. "Do you really think a little gun can stop me?" he sneered. Sylvia took a deep breath and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the cabin, and the chef stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. Jameson quickly freed himself from the ropes and tackled the chef to the ground. They struggled for a few moments before Jameson finally managed to subdue him. As they called for backup, Sylvia looked around the kitchen, feeling sickened by what she saw. She couldn't believe that someone could be capable of such horrific acts. But then she thought of the families who were being held captive and the relief she felt at knowing they had been saved. She knew that they had done their job and that justice would be served. As they waited for backup to arrive, Jameson looked over at Sylvia. "You saved our lives back there," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Sylvia shrugged. "I was just doing my job." Jameson nodded. "Well, you did it damn well." As they sat in the kitchen waiting for backup to arrive, Sylvia couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She knew that this case would stay with her for a long time, and that the horrors she had witnessed would haunt her dreams for years to come. Chapter 3. The Escape Attempt. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Jameson used his detective skills to track down the family. The stench of decaying flesh filled his nostrils as he led them through the maze-like corridors of the abandoned building. Suddenly, he heard footsteps, and he motioned for the family to hide behind a stack of crates. As the footsteps grew louder, Jameson's heart raced with anticipation. Suddenly, a group of the chef's loyal followers rounded the corner, brandishing knives and other deadly weapons. Jameson knew they had to act fast if they wanted to survive. With a quick nod, Jameson signaled for Sylvia to take the family and make a run for it. He stayed behind to hold off the attackers. As Sylvia and the family dashed towards the exit, Jameson engaged in a brutal fight with the followers. His fists flew with lightning speed, landing powerful blows on the faces and bodies of the attackers. But they were too many, and Jameson's strength began to wane. One of the followers grabbed him from behind, and Jameson struggled to break free, but it was too late. As Jameson felt a sharp pain in his side, he knew he was done for. But just as he was about to black out, he saw Sylvia charging towards him, armed with a knife. She plunged the blade into the attacker's back, freeing Jameson from his grasp. With a newfound energy, Jameson fought back with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed. But as he was about to land the final blow, he heard a gunshot, and Sylvia crumpled to the ground. Jameson's heart shattered into a million pieces as he watched his friend take her final breath. He knew he couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. With renewed determination, he charged at the attackers, taking them down one by one. But just as they were about to make their escape, the chef appeared out of nowhere, his face twisted into a sinister grin. He had anticipated their every move, and they had fallen right into his trap. Jameson and the family were quickly overpowered and dragged back to their cells, where they were left to wonder if they would ever see the light of day again. Chapter 4. Jameson's Last Stand. Jameson's heart was pounding as the chef and his loyal followers led the family and him to a hidden room. The smell of rotting flesh and blood filled his nostrils, and he knew that they were running out of time. The chef was getting closer to finishing his monstrous meal. As they entered the room, Jameson quickly scanned the area for any possible escape routes. He noticed a small opening in the wall, just big enough for him to crawl through. He knew he had to act fast, or else they would all be doomed. With his heart racing, Jameson waited for the right moment to make his move. Suddenly, one of the chef's followers lunged at him, and a brutal fight ensued. Jameson fought with all his might, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. Despite being injured, Jameson summoned every ounce of strength he had and managed to break free from the group. He darted towards the opening and crawled through it, leaving the family behind. As he emerged on the other side, Jameson realized that he had little time left to find someone to help and return to save the family. He stumbled through the dark and dingy corridors, his body aching with pain. Chapter 5. The Betrayal. Jameson manages to crawl to a nearby road and flags down a police car. As he leads the officers back to the chef's cabin, he can feel his injuries taking a toll on his body. He pushes through the pain, determined to save the family and bring the chef to justice. As they approach the cabin, Jameson can hear the faint sound of screams coming from inside. The officers draw their weapons, ready for a final confrontation with the chef and his followers. The door bursts open and the chef appears, wielding a meat cleaver. Jameson fires his gun, hitting the chef in the shoulder. The chef falls to the ground, but he still manages to grab a knife and throw it towards Jameson. The knife cuts through Jameson's shoulder, causing him to drop his weapon. The officers move in to secure the area, while Jameson crawls towards the room where the family is being held captive. He enters the room to find them all dead, their bodies mutilated beyond recognition. Jameson is overcome with grief and despair. He had failed to save them. As Jameson is rushed to a nearby hospital for his injuries, he tries to process the horrors he has witnessed. When he is given anesthesia, he drifts off into a deep sleep. But when he wakes up, he realizes that he is not in a hospital. He is strapped to a table, surrounded by cooking utensils and ingredients. And standing over him, with a twisted smile on her face, is Sylvia. "You really are a great detective, Jameson," Sylvia says, as she injects him with another dose of anesthesia. "But you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated me. You see, I am the real chef, and now you will be the star ingredient in my next dish." He struggled to fight back, but the anesthetic had already taken hold. As Sylvia prepared her tools and began to carve into Jameson's flesh, he realized that he had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated the chef's true power, and now he was paying the ultimate price.